ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for standing by. Welcome to the Set for Success Evaluating and Motivating Staff Through Performance Reviews webinar. Please note that during the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. If you would like to ask a question, simply use the chat feature located in the lower left corner of your screen. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded Wednesday, July 8th, 2015. Another reminder, you'll receive a copy of the slides, so you'll have all the information for future reference via email in 2 days. This email will come from HR Direct. My name is Stephanie Thomas, and I'm your host on behalf of HR Direct today. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. We're so excited to talk about performance management with all of you. Now I'm pleased to introduce you to our speaker, Mike Haberman, Human Resources Consultant. I'll now turn it over to you, Mike. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Stephanie. I am happy to be here, and welcome to everybody that is attending. I hope you find this to be a valuable session. A little bit about me before we get started so you have some idea of what the credentials are. I have been in human resources for about 35 years, both as a practitioner, consultant, teacher, and writer. I started off my career working as a recruiter, and then moved to a low-tech packaging firm, and then went to a high-tech software firm, and then decided at one point, or at least the company decided for me, that I might be better off working on another situation, and I decided that I would like to help small companies. And so since 1991, I have been consulting with small and mid-sized companies on a broad spectrum of human resources issues, of which one of those is performance management. I have both my SPHR and my SHRM's SCP certifications, and I write a human resources blog that is actually coming up on the end of 10 years, and at some point I invite you to go take a look at that. It's called HR Observations, which can be found at OmegaHRSolutions.com. All right, and I think we want to start off by taking a poll to see what kind of background you all have in performance evaluation. So, give me an idea of how your organization conducts formal performance reviews. Do you do it annually? Do you do it twice a year? Do you do it quarterly? Or do you only do it when it's necessary, or potentially even not at all? There are a lot of different ways to do it. Probably those of you that do it more often than quarterly aren't going to be on here because you already know how to do it fairly well. Well, the responses are coming in pretty good. There's a lot of people who do it annually, and some of you do it twice a year. Very few of you do it on a quarterly basis, and then there are actually 27 of you so far who don't do it. So it is an interesting result that we have there, but let's go ahead and we're going to close the poll. We're closing the poll right there. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cover today how you evaluate your employees. Chances are that you have very, very busy years, and a lot of work that gets done, both by the manager and by the employee. So where do you start? How do you determine if their performance is good, great, or just adequate? For those of you who are doing performance appraisals already, or performance reviews already, you probably know you have a way of approaching this, but I'm going to be sharing some tips that may give you some additional information. Then I'm going to talk about setting goals. Goals are absolutely critical to managing employee performance. They outline expectations, they give employees direction and motivation, they serve as a measurable framework for when the next review comes around. But despite the importance of having goals, a lot of managers struggle with creating effective goals for employees that go beyond just the listing of that employee's job functions. As an example, some people say customer service, you've got to deal with employee calls, but they don't give them any parameters around which to manage that process by. How many calls? How long do those calls have to take? and those types of specificity in those goals. I'm going to spend a few minutes on outlining the performance review process, give you some practical steps on conducting the actual performance review. Then I'm going to share how to give constructive feedback to employees who aren't performing so well and what you can say and do to help them improve. And then I'll cover the flip side of that as well. How do you reward employees for good performance? Most employers tie raises to performance reviews if they're giving raises. So I'll talk a little bit about how you go about doing that, and then we'll finish with some pointers on improving the review process for the next review. Before we get started, I really want to drive home the importance of having a formal performance review process. As you see by the results, a lot of you haven't, some of you don't. There is a lot of controversy in today's HR literature on the necessity of a performance evaluation. You can find articles that have said, let's crash this process, let's throw it out the door. Typically those are side by side with the articles that also say, let's get rid of human resources, but that's another issue. I personally think that performance reviews, documented performance reviews, are important. I don't know about you, but I want to know how I'm doing my job. As a consultant, I want my clients to tell me whether I've done a good job. As a human resources manager, as a recruiting manager, I was always interested in what my boss thought about what I did. I didn't like being out there not really having the direction that I thought was necessary for me to be effective, and I think probably most of you feel the same way. So it is absolutely important to have that. Performance reviews let employees know what's expected of them. Sometimes we get so bogged down in our day-to-day jobs, our day-to-day tasks, the paperwork, the meetings, the emails, that we just don't see the bigger picture. You can trail off and get lost easily. And a performance evaluation is a way of sort of course correcting and bringing us back to the bigger picture to make sure that everybody's on track. You get to determine whether your work is aligned with company goals, and over the course of the year, those day-to-day tasks or longer-term projects, do they contribute to the company overall? So I can't stress enough the importance of doing that performance review. Another aspect of how important these are is weekly or biweekly meetings tend to be more informal. A lot of times there's no paperwork involved, there's no documentation involved. And by setting formal performance reviews, you're putting evaluations, both positive and negative, in writing. Having some written documentation helps reinforce certain employment decisions. If you need to fire someone for underperforming, you've got the paperwork to prove it. Perhaps you need to set up a performance improvement plan, and you've got the paperwork to do that. Or, in the other positive case, you want to promote somebody. And a lot of times you're going to have to prove to your management why that person is promotable, and you'll have the documentation to show that. I once had an attorney tell me that she preferred to have one page of documentation as opposed to 10,000 words of testimony. And that's one of the other things that performance appraisals can do for you, is to protect you in court and provide you with the business reasons. If you pay attention to the EEOC and the U.S. Department of Labor, they are increasingly looking for the business decisions that you made in affecting somebody's employment. So that performance review is critically important. And if any of you ever dealt with your unemployment offices, a lot of times it's important there as well. But it is important to remember that a performance meeting needs to be a two-way conversation, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, which means that you need to be asking employees what they need from you to do a better job. And even if you're not asking that question directly, typically you can read between the lines, and it's important for you to pay attention to that in the performance appraisal process. The key to effective performance review is preparation. If you procrastinate and pull together material the day of or even the week before the review itself, you're not going to give it enough thought. You're not going to give it enough seriousness to go along with it. I've had supervisors that worked for me in the past that typically would have a shift of people that they have to review, 20 people or so, and in that particular case, they waited until the day that the performance reviews were due to sit down and run through the checkbox form. That is not the way to do it. They got nothing out of it. The employee got nothing out of it. And as far as I was concerned in human resources, the paperwork was basically useless because they did not put that preparation in there. You've got to cover and in my opinion that you can do an effective review is to ask an employee for their review of their performance. It is, if you're managing multiple people, it can be hard to keep track of every single assignment that every single employee is working on. But employees, by producing a review for you, can let you know the ins and outs of their work. So about a month before that review is due, what you need to do is give that employee a self-review form, basically the same form that you're going to use to do their review, and ask them to fill that out. It's going to act as a discussion point for you. You want to ask them to give that to you back about 2 weeks after you've given it to them, allow them to put some thought into it, and then that's going to act as information from which you are then going to construct your review. It may reveal to you things that you were unaware of, changes in their jobs that you potentially may have been unaware of, drops in deadlines that you may have been unaware of. So have them do that. Encourage the employees to include the details in their self-assessment, not just a list of work that they've done. How did it go? What worked well? What did not work well? What prohibited them from doing a good job? What could have facilitated them doing a better job? Ask for that kind of detail in that. And if they have incomplete projects, pay attention to whether they are blaming themselves for that, or they're blaming the system for that, or they're blaming coworkers for that. And then that gives you something to investigate so that when you get to that point of talking to them, you have some idea of what needs to be talked about. Once you've got the employee's self-appraisal, read through it, review your own notes. Now, if you're not regularly keeping notes on performance, then shame on you. You need to be keeping notes on performance. And I think Gene Eel actually produces a supervisor's book where you can take notes on each individual employee. But you can use any kinds of method. I have used in the past and still do use on various things a pen and paper system. I carry a little notebook called Field Notes. I also have on my phone and on my tablets Evernote, a software product called Evernote that allows me to save notes. I mean, there is no lack of way to keep notes. You can, on your cell phone or on a recorder, you can record the notes. Whatever way you're going to do it, you need to do it so you can remind yourself, particularly if you're doing this on an annual basis, of what occurred earlier in the year. It jogs your memory. One of the biggest errors that occur in in performance appraisal is something called the recency error, where the manager only remembers what happened recently. It used to be one of my favorite errors to take advantage of. About 3 months before my review would come up, man, I became a model employee. I showed up early, I stayed late, I got everything, assignments done. I made sure I was visible to the boss because I knew that his habit was he didn't take notes, and the stuff that occurred earlier in the year had faded in his memory. So if I'm smart enough to figure that out, your employees are smart enough to figure that out as well. So make sure you're taking those notes that you can then jog your memory on. You also may want to, depending upon the philosophy of your team and your company, use the 360-degree feedback process. You can do it formally, you can do it informally. You're typically not going to go to your employees' co-workers and ask them. That's probably not a good way to do that, but you certainly want to interact with sort of customers of the employee, other managers that they deal with, perhaps a different department that they deliver some product or service to, and get some feedback from them on what that perceived performance is for that employee. Writing performance reviews is, once you have enough information from the employee's performance, it's time to write that review. You've got the information from them, you've got your notes, now you need to sit down and do that. And you want to write it down as opposed to just jotting some notes for the verbal discussion. That review is going to be stored in their folder. It's going to be referenced later for employment decisions. It's going to, both good decisions and bad decisions, it may be used to defend yourself. It is important to avoid generalizations. Focus on the details. Put examples in the written evaluations which could help reinforce that decision that you're making and provide that proof of that employee's performance. Include hard data. Now, and that's getting more and more common where we actually have, everybody has performance data. It's easier to do with some jobs than it is with others. But any production data you have, any performance data you have, any other metrics that you have that provide that hard data is important. And one of the reasons it's important is it is perceived as being objective. If you're doing this right, the employee has participated in setting those, and I'm going to be talking about that a little bit later. And so the numbers don't lie for the most part. If you're just offering your opinion and your feelings and your attitudes, it's going to be perceived as being subjective, and employees, for the most part, why they like to know what you think about them, do not want an entire performance evaluation based upon on subjective determination. I was just reading something earlier today that said, I just had a review and it was so subjective, it was a pack of lies. And that's the way a lot of people perceive those subjective appraisals to be. So use those metrics in your performance reviews. That's, use those numbers, use those letters. And then, excuse me, when using those metrics, it's important to remember that what you're providing for this employee is not a report card. I had this as a problem with one of my employees one time who she saw, meeting expectations, exceeding expectations, and wildly exceeding expectations as A, B's, and C's. And so when I said to her that she was meeting expectations, she thought she had gotten a C report card. And she was actually in tears because she said, I stress with my children that they have to get A's and B's, and here I'm taking my report card home and I have C's. How am I going to face my family? And I had to explain to her that a C means you're meeting expectations. It is that middle of the road is you're doing your job, and you're doing your job well. There are options for you exceeding expectations, and there are certainly, if you're grading somebody in an A, that means that they're probably so good that there's no room for improvement, and you need to be looking to do something else with them. But one of the things you need to explain to them is what those ratings actually mean and what those definitions of the various things are that you are rating, so that you have that understanding. The picture here is one that's provided by Gene Neal that explains those ratings. It's good to use, and just let them know that what you expect of them is to meet your expectations, and so that's actually a good report card. Since this written evaluation is going to remain in the employee's file, it's very important to be very careful in the language that you use. You should always avoid phrasing things that could be perceived as discriminatory, especially when it's written down. There are a couple areas of protected classes, excuse me, particularly age and disability, in my opinion, that can get you in a lot of trouble. Most managers are well enough to not mention somebody's race and not mention somebody's gender, not mention somebody's nationality. But you get into age, you got a baby boomer who is slower and they're not producing enough numbers, then a lot of managers are tempted to say, hey, Joe, since you turned 60, you're just not working as hard as you used to. You're slowing down. Or, hey, Mary, since you went out and had your surgery, you just don't seem to be working up to snuff. Those are two statements right there that will get you all in trouble. And yes, somebody in human resources is not going to make those statements, but I'll tell you what, a supervisor or manager may be very likely to make that statement. So make sure that that language is not used, those allusions are not made. Focus on the performance. Focus on the numbers, and stay away from attitudes and some of those other issues. And then once you've got that performance evaluation written, then the next thing to do is to tackle those goals. I know some companies create new goals prior to the performance review, while others wait until after the performance review. Part of whether you create them ahead of time or behind is also the seniority of the employee that you're dealing with. If you have a brand new employee who is going through their onboarding process and you're now going to do a review at 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days, at that point they haven't participated in any goal setting. And at that point, it is proper to give them the goals that they need to be achieving. But after that first year, they now have some idea. And at that annual performance review, you now want them to participate in that goal-setting process that's based upon both the company goals and the department goals, you as a manager's goal, and then their goals. So it's time to do another poll. I'm curious about what you all are doing in terms of setting goals. Do you only set goals for the company? Does it go down to the employee level? Where do you do it across all levels, or do you do it only when the job is created? So give me some idea of how you all go about setting goals. Like I said, in my opinion, if you've got a brand new employee, then you're going to be setting the goals for them, but a senior employee is probably going to be participating in that. But a lot of times they participate in that just solely based upon them with not necessarily any relationship to what the company is doing. It looks like most of you have some sort of goal-setting process. There are some of you that don't set goals, and a couple of you that only do it when it's created. So there are a couple of you that need to work on that process right there. As you can see, 43% do it across all levels. Some do it at company level, but there is a decent number that don't do anything at all. So, all right. Thank you for participating in that. I can't stress how important goals are for improving employee performance. In the 35 years I've done this, where I have both delivered performance evaluations, had my own performance evaluation, helped managers with their performance evaluation, the importance of goals keeps getting stressed to me every time I get involved with that. When you give your employees goals, you give them direction on what they should be doing. And beyond that, what you expect their performance to be. So as an example, say you're working in a company that has multiple lines of business and you're managing a sales rep. If you create a goal to sell 10 units of one product per week and 50 of another, just by setting that goal, you're indicating which line of business is most important and which product requires more time and attention. The reason that is important is in that product mix right there, the sales rep might actually get more commission off of the smaller number of units, and they're going to have a tendency to sell more of those, where the 50 is actually more important to what the company is trying to do. So you have to help that employee distinguish between their private goal and the overall company goal. But anyways, when there's a clear goal, employees know whether they're falling behind or whether they're exceeding expectations, and that just makes that whole performance process easier to do. The other benefit of goals is that you can actually help employees align with the mission. But it is incumbent upon you as a manager or a department supervisor or as HR to understand how the department fits in with the overall company mission. So we always talk about, being more strategic in human resources. Well, one of the ways that you can do that is by understanding what the overall direction and mission of the company is, and with that you can then filter those, cascade those goals down to the individual level and help people understand how their personal goals in their job align with the company's mission. As that first bullet point says, helping employees in the goal creation process also helps raise their engagement level. It gives employees some ownership over their job and their careers. Now again, a brand new employee, you're not going to have the opportunity to help them with that. They're not going to participate in that. But for people who've been around for a period of time, this is the 4th or 5th or 6th, 10th, 20th year, they're going to have some input. They're going to have some idea of where they'd like their careers to go. They're going to have some idea of how goals assigned to them or ones that they participate in are going to relate to their future. So you can increase employees' engagement by allowing them to participate in that goal-setting process. None of us, I'll guarantee you, nobody on this call likes to be dictated to. And you don't want to have somebody say, here, you have to do that. It's a much better process for there to be a collaborative effort saying, this is where we need to get, this is what we need to do, and this is how we're going to get there. Having them participate in their goals shows you as a manager what their interests are and where their strengths may lie when they help assign goals. Now that doesn't mean that the work that they view as being less interesting gets shoved to the side or gets removed from their plate. They still have to do that stuff, but it gives them an opportunity to see how their efforts can increase productivity. If an employee creates an aggressive goal, like doubling their workload for a certain task, that means they can take on more, which means that they can, you as a manager can confidently assign something to them or get them to agree to do something that may be a reach for them. Employees typically know what their limits are. Some may dog it, some may be a little bit more aggressive, so you've got to be careful with that. If the goal is too low, you can obviously raise the output to motivate them, if you want to call it that way, but at least it gives you a better idea of what's realistic. For example, if an employee is currently making 10 widgets, the widely vaunted widgets, and you want to boost that number, you might be thinking of asking them to do 25, but they may come back and say that they think they would be comfortable in reaching to 15, and you might then be able to settle with them to something between that 15 and that 25. So there's a little bit of negotiation in there. You certainly have to be considerate of what your goals are as the manager, what the department's goals are as a division of the company, and then what the company's goals are. But that's the process that you can go through. All of you have probably seen this acronym before, SMART goals. Anybody out there that's listening to this that has ever tried to diet, this is part of the advice that's giving to you, is to make your dieting goals SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-oriented. You want to be, as an example, in losing weight, you want to have a weight goal you want to do. You need to make sure it's measurable. Pounds are. It's got to be achievable, which means it's got to be realistic. Those of you that start off your diet by saying, I'm going to lose 50 pounds in the next 2 weeks, you are being unrealistic and you're never going to achieve that. Well, that's the same way with setting goals for employees. It is You can't say to somebody, you're normally selling 10 of this product per week, but next week I want you to sell 1,000 of them. That is just not the way it is done. That's not going to be realistic. And though it's specific and though it's measurable, it is not going to be achievable. Let's see here. The deadline, that's important as well. But the measurable part is you've got to have that metric. You've got to have that number. You've got to have that measurable, achievable goal set so that your employees can be tied into this. The timeliness of this, you've got to take a look at the calendar. You've got to pay attention to customer demands. You've got to pay attention to schedules, and just make sure that in setting of those goals that you are conscious of those time frames. I'll stop here at this point because I've seen a couple questions that a couple people that one person has said, I have an issue with a younger employee who wants to do it all right now. How do you rein them in without undermining their spirit? I think one of the things you can do with that is tying them more into the company mission and actually talking to them about the SMART part of this and making sure that what they're trying to do, is it indeed achievable? Is it indeed really realistic? So it is, I think that's the way, if you can show them that what they're doing is not meeting that measurable and achievable and certainly realistic goal point, you might rein them in a little bit. A follow-up question on that was, do all employees need to have SMART goals? I think any time you set a goal, they should be using this acronym. Every goal, whether it is loss of weight, whether it is walking around the block, whether it is achieving a report, you can talk about what it is, can it be measured, is it realistic, does it tie into our business, and then what's the deadline we're going to set. So yes, I think that SMART is a good acronym, regardless of what level you're setting this out. There are some additional goals that you want to have for goals. Those stretch things, where assigning a stretch goal is actually a fine balancing act. You want goals to be aggressive enough to spur employees on and to boost their performance, but you don't want it to be so aggressive, and this goes back to some of our younger employees, that they discourage people. You don't want them to see that what they're trying to do actually ends up being impossible to get to. So you can set high goals, but don't forget that SMART, achievable aspect of that, and make it realistic. I touched upon the fact that goals need to be relevant and specifically in regards to company objectives, but don't overlook your company's mission and the values. There used to be an old system of performance evaluation called MBO, or Management by Objectives, that everybody thought, wow, this is a fantastic system. We're going to just measure people on their productivity. What they discovered very quickly was, though, that some people cheat to get to their goals. And take the example of having a sales rep that has to sell, $500,000 worth of product. One sales rep can do that by fostering relationships with customers and getting repeat sales. Another one can go and do that by kidnapping the daughter of the owner of one of their customers and holding them for ransom to get that $500,000. If all you were doing was gauging them on the achievement of that $500,000, then you would have to say both of them were successful in that process. But that didn't take into consideration the values of the company. Most of us don't want to use kidnap as a sales process. So they developed behavioral anchored rating scales, and eventually the whole MBO process in bars collapsed under its own weight. there are a couple questions that I will try to come back to at the end of this that dealt a little bit with some of these other things. So I'm going to I'll come back and visit those. One of the things that's big today for a lot of companies is teams. Many of us have our companies formed around teams, and it's important to set team goals. It is important to have everybody work in concert and not just be individual performers. And subsequently, you need to set those team goals that, for the most part, you're probably going to have everybody participate in what those team goals, and then everybody's going to have a particular part in that. Those goals can be aggressive too, but since there are multiple hands that are working to achieve that, it can ultimately, be achievable to help reach that stretch goal. But taking into consideration the individual effort, taking into consideration. Now, one of the things that goes along with that you want to take into consideration in setting the team goals is how you're potentially compensating people for that. And that's a whole another webinar on compensation of team goals. But you've got to make sure that they're working in concert with people's individual goals. And if their individual goals are more important than the team goals, then they're going to work on their individual goals as opposed to the team goals. All right. We've gone through all the effort of preparing this. We have created the goals, and now it's time to actually do the review. So what do? Well, my first bit of advice on this is approach your performance review as a conversation. You hear that a lot. Approach your interview with a candidate as a conversation. Approach your employees with conversations, and I think the performance review is the same way. You want to sit down and you want to have a good conversation with this individual. So you want to have a private setting. Hopefully you can do it away from your office because you're going to be distracted with some of the things in your office. But if not, make sure the door is closed, the phone is shut off, and you're sitting away from that computer. I don't know how many of you ever sat in an interview or sat in a performance review and had the boss sit there and keep looking over at the computer screen, or checking a phone while they're conducting a review with us. It's very distracting, very demeaning, and people, to use current lingo, feel disrespected in that process. So make sure you have that private setting and that you are allowing yourself a lot of time between sessions if you're trying to schedule multiple ones in a day. Book yourself that room, book yourself on the calendar. Going back to what I said earlier, you want to try to do this make that invite about a month ahead of time, put it on the calendar, allow that employee time to go through and do their self-review, and then give yourself time to write that review as well. Now, I can hear some of you, if your manager's going, man, I don't have the time to do that. I've got my job to do. Well, if you're a manager, your job is management, and this is your job. The other stuff is you've got divided responsibilities, and you're not doing your management, and you need to be talking to your boss about setting what your goals are for your management job. Make sure that you set a reminder on your calendar, and for both your employee and for you, there is nothing worse than having your employees show up at your door prepared to sit and have a performance evaluation, and you go, oh, darn, I forgot we were doing that today. Can we do it another time? So it is not, that's just not good form. The ins and outs of your performance reviews are going to vary depending upon the employee and his or her performance, but here's what you want to go through. Kick off the meeting, start reviewing what those primary job responsibilities are, how they met them if you had those goals already set. whether they went through and had met those goals. Include plenty of time for discussion in there. This is really going to be the meat of your performance conversation with them. In fact, that's and I want you to remember that term, performance conversation. That's a good way to think about it. This is a good place for give and take, back and forth, questions of why, questions of why not, that both you and the employee can ask each other. Once you've gone through that, hopefully you have some consensus on what the past performance looked like, and now it's time to move on to that future performance. And really that's the value out of this performance review process, is to be moving forward. You want to engage your employee in what do they see their roles are, and it is and you want to get from them how they feel about themselves. Hopefully you get them to sign that review or sign that process of it. Now, if you're opted to go ahead and do next year's goals at this meeting here, then now is the time to do that. Now, part of the reasoning that goes into doing goals at the end of somebody's performance evaluation will also hinge on when you're doing the performance evaluation. If you're one of the companies that stays all their performance evaluations to the end of their calendar or fiscal year, then it is certainly the best time to do a new goals setting process. If you do sit on somebody's anniversary year, then their anniversary year may not jive with their performance, with the company's performance year, and so it may not be appropriate at that time to set goals, and you're going to hold that goal setting process perhaps till the end of the year. So you're going to have to pay attention to where it means, where you are in the process. On a related note, this is a very good time, whether it's the end of the year or whether it's the anniversary date for the employee. It is a good time to discuss professional development with the employee. Even if the goals don't include development items, you can get some idea of where they want to go. You can get some idea of what they feel would be important for them in their own personal aspirations. They may have some interest in mind that you're not aware of, and that you may want to explore a little bit with them. So at the end of all that is now when you get them to sign that copy. Now, if things haven't gone well in that, they may not be willing to sign that, in which case you have a little bit of an issue, and you can just note that they did not agree to sign that. And those are the kinds of situations that you may have been actually reviewing somebody's performance that was not very good. So let's move to that. Disciplinary actions. Even if somebody's had a bad year, trying to avoid disciplinary actions during the performance review, I would try to do that unless it's absolutely necessary to discuss that. Hopefully you have had discussions before on their performance as things have occurred. If you see people doing something wrong, they're not performing at the level, they're not making the numbers, it is unfair to them, it is unfair to the organization, and it's unfair to you to wait to talk to them about that till the end of the year. They end up with very bad feelings about that. And I have a personal example that was similar to that, where I ended up with a very negative attitude as a result of what somebody was saying to me. One of the ways to change employees' behavior is by giving them what I call actually constructive feedback. We use the term criticism, but I'm not a big fan of criticism. Most of us don't react well to criticism. We may react a little better to a critique, but we probably react better to feedback. So I think rather than approaching this from constructive criticism standpoint, view it as constructive feedback. Everybody probably expects to hear something. None of us are perfect. None of us think that we're perfect, with the exception of an occasional person. So you want to make sure that they are getting that proper feedback that you need to have. Keep those discussions civil, make them effective, make sure that you are actually focusing on numbers and not subjective issues. You want to use what's called the stop, start, and continue method, where you tell employees to stop doing certain actions. You tell them to start taking specific actions that's going to boost their performance, and then you tell them to continue what they're doing well. Stay away from the personality stuff. You don't want to use judgmental terms like, Fred, that was a really stupid thing that you did 2 weeks ago. Bad term to use. It's judgmental. It doesn't focus on the actual performance. So be very careful about that kind of language. After giving that feedback, most of us have a tendency to try to lessen the impact of that feedback. We usually try to follow up with a compliment, and that's not really one of the best ways to do it. It's called the feedback sandwich, which actually can be very dangerous with truly poor performers, because you take away the impact of that process. And you want them to hear that situation. Unless the situation's truly hopeless, let employees know that you are confident in their ability to turn things around. You can bolster them, but it is important to ask them, how do you feel you can improve performance? What additional tools do you need to have? Do we need more meetings? Do we need less meetings? What roadblocks can I help you remove to help you get to where the performance is that you need to be? A lot of companies have a tendency to attach compensation to performance reviews. I actually think that's a bad idea. I think you are better off divorcing those things. I think that's one of the reasons I think more frequent performance evaluations will help you with that. If you have even 2 a year, the mid-year one can focus strictly on performance and adjustment of the process, as opposed to having somebody focus on, wow, what am I going to get paid? What am I going to be making? And is this going well? Does that mean that I'm not going to get a good increase? So with in that process, I think you are better off telling people at the outset, hey, this is going to be a good review. You're going to be happy with this outcome, and as a result of that, you're going to get a 3% increase, or you're going to get a promotion. Or, hey, this is not going to be a good review. We're going to discuss how you can improve it. We're going to discuss the reasons I didn't think it was a good review, and as a result of that, there is not going to be any increase, so let's focus on the performance. Those are tough statements to make, particularly that latter one, but I think you are better off in trying to divorce that. If you have had that mid-review, or you've had a couple of them, you've already had a chance to approach that and give the person time to change their ways, and so those statements become a little easier to deal with. Let's see here. Well, hopefully that gives you a couple tricks on what you can do, but let's go in and review some of those things. Offer real-time feedback. Do not wait till the end of the year. There should never be a surprise in an annual performance evaluation. Everybody should say, yes, I expected to see that coming, because you are giving real-time feedback to people, and hopefully even doing the performance evaluation process a little more often. Never, ever should there be surprise. Keep lots of notes and on performance. Keep the numbers, keep the dates, keep the facts, And this is where that supervisor's journal that G. Neal produces that can be very helpful, but your notes need to be there. If you're in HR, you know that documentation is the bane of our existence, and as a supervisor, most supervisors and managers hate to do that documentation as well. But again, it protects you in your decision making, it bolsters your decision making, and it will help keep you out of court. Have that pre-meeting that you need to have. Help create those goals for your employees by working with them and having that planning meeting to help those goals. And then finally, increase, my recommendation is increase the frequency of that formal review. I think all of you need to get away from that annual process. Everybody hates the annual process, and that if you've had multiple discussions throughout the year, which can be documented, then the annual process becomes much less painful. With some final notes, let's wrap everything up with this. So ask your employees to provide that self-written review. Stick to that constructive feedback of doing the stop, start, and continue model. Focus on motivating people who are not achieving at the level you would like to, as opposed to disciplining them. And you can do that by preventing them from being underperformers by having more frequent meetings with them and more interventions with them. Keep those goals SMART, and then discuss their performance on a regular basis. So with that, we have some questions that I saw over here on the side that I'm going to try to get to now, because there are a fair number of them. Wowee.
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
This is awesome. You did a great job. Do you want me to help comb through some of these questions? We've got a lot, or you got it under control?
I may not go through them all. I'm going to just sort of move down them, or if you feel, Stephanie, that there are a couple that could be summarized, perhaps.
One thing we should revisit, you had mentioned the behavioral model that is now being used instead of the MBO process, and I know that question we might want to quickly revisit, because that's a quick one.
Well, the behavior model that actually I mentioned went along with the MBO process, and between the behavioral anchored rating scales and the MBO process, it sort of collapsed under its own weight. There is a new movement in industry, though, called ROE, which is results only work environments, that is sort of bringing back the MBO process. But if you're going to use something like that, you still have to be aware of how people are achieving those goals. So it helps if you have a values statement for the company that you check the achievement of those goals against. Make sure that people are doing their goal achievement within the values that have been expressed in the company.
Cool. So
yeah, now there is one question here I do want to approach a little bit. It says, in contrast, how do you keep a long-time employee who is approaching the end of their career motivated and focused?
Yeah, that's a good
one.
Well,
yeah, that is certainly a difficult one. Hopefully, rather than sitting there and saying, hey, Mary, you're getting close to retirement. If you'd like to stay here until your last day, I would suggest you work harder. That's always motivational, but it's kind of depressing at the same time and can get you in trouble. You want to make sure that you're working on employee engagement. And I would sit and talk to them and say, hey, Mary, we haven't seen the production numbers out of you that we would like to see. What can we do? How can we help you to bring those numbers back up? How can we make you more engaged in this process? What is it that we need to do? What is it that I, as your manager, need to do to make this more interesting for you, to make this something that you want to try to achieve? Hopefully that will get the idea across to them that they need to produce at a higher level. It's certainly a much more diplomatic way of doing it. Now, in all honesty, if Mary has already been retired in place, and we all have employees who retired in place, and many of them years ago, there may not be a whole lot you can do. But one of the things that you as a company need to be certainly concerned with are your engagement scores. Are people engaged in their jobs? Are they engaged in the company? And if you have low scores for your engagement, then in many cases you are also going to have these people that have retired in place, and you're not going to be able to do much about it. Let's see here. What do you do when you have an employee who does the bare minimum well but doesn't make an effort to reach the next level and shows no interest in the outcome of the mission? Well, to be honest with you, if they're not contributing to the company, I would be honest with them and invite them to go find something that they're going to be interested in doing. So, that most of us think, well, somebody is not doing enough to get fired, but they're not doing enough to move ahead, that we got to keep them. No, you don't. You don't have to. Find if it would be to the benefit of the company to find somebody that can do a better job, then do so. Let's see. How do I set a goal for an employee who has been making the same mistake for the last 10 months? Well, you know what? To be honest with you, you're too late. That should have occurred. You should have had that discussion 9 months ago. And if they weren't achieving after that 1 month, ask them why they weren't. I would never let an employee go for 10 months without achieving what they're supposed to be achieving and producing the results they're supposed to be achieving. That's hate to say it, but that's poor management. Don't mean to insult you, but
good question. Oh, sorry to interrupt you. Wanted to cover another question that just
Sure.
came in that was good. A few people asked it, so I wanted to cover it. Why should you not ask for team or peer input for a review for an employee?
Well, I thought about that after I said that, and actually, if you are working on a team, certainly team input may be important. One of the problems you have with actually asking for that input from team members is you've got to be very, very careful about the politics of your team, about the meshing of your team. You could have a team of, let me give you an example of one of the criticisms of high-tech firms is their high male populations. And you can get a woman introduced into the team. The men may feel that she is not appropriately there. And so you're asking for that feedback. You may be getting a lot of negative feedback that is based on their biases as opposed to their actual team performance. So if you're going to do it, you've got to be aware of what those potential biases may be.
That's a good point. Consider the context throughout everything and anything you hear as a manager, and keep your eyes and ears open. You can't just sit in your office hoping that the performance review will work out. We do have time for one more, Mike, if you want to cover one.
Here's one I wanted to address. It says, if an employee has less quantifiable goals, how do you suggest implementing SMART goals? You can actually create numbers and measures for everything. A lot of people used to think that human resources was non-quantifiable, that you really couldn't do it. Well, we've learned that that is not true. They're actually something along the lines that were created by the Saratoga Institute, now PricewaterhouseCoopers. There are 960 some odd metrics for human resources. So you can create something, work with the employee and say, I'm struggling on how I can measure your job. Let's create some measures. So, and then when you create those goals, when you create those measures, then you need to do it in terms of the time, the specific, the time activated, and whether it's achievable or not.
Thank you, Mike. I think we've covered all the questions we could today, specifically about the topic. If you have any other questions, the audience can email me. You will receive a follow-up email in the next 2 days, and my email address will be in there, and we'll be happy to address them for you. I did want to cover 2 questions that we received a few times about receiving a copy of the slides. And yes, in the next 2 days, you will receive an email from HR Direct, so keep an eye out for that email in your inbox. In that email, you'll get more information about the products we talked about in today's webinar. A few people asked about where can I get in a performance appraisal form like the ones you've talked about today? And we do have more information on that in your follow-up email when you check that out on Friday. We'll also have a link to a copy of the slides, so you'll be able to get those slides printed out and keep on handy. And if you attended the presentation late or would like to revisit some of the information we discussed, you can view the recording as well on YouTube. So we'll be sending all of that information out to you via email. Thank you again, Mike. We really appreciate you being here with us today. Thank you to the audience for attending. Mike, I loved how you talked today about a subjective review as a pack of lies. I thought that was probably the most powerful piece of information that stuck with me today. And as you guys wrap up, I want to remind you all, we have our HR Direct webinar series, and next month we will have a webinar about employee leave. So you'll also get that information in your follow-up email. Our next webinar will be called Don't Be Left Behind, How to Manage Employee Leave. And sometimes, employees ask for longer leave, and you need to consider, is it a serious health condition, or does the employee need to leave to care for a close relative? What are the rules surrounding employee leave that last for weeks or even months? So in this webinar on August 5th, you'll learn how employees, managers, and HR can prepare for a leave of absence and pay and record-keeping requirements for employee leave that are compliant with their business laws and practices. So you'll get all this information in your follow-up email. One more time, Mike, thank you again. We really appreciate having you here today.
Well, I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all, everyone, and have a great day.